Story 1. I was traveling to Las Vegas to meet up with some friends and pre-booked my seat. With this airline, they charge extra for certain seats. I chose a window seat with extra legroom due to my disability, which cost me an additional $45. When boarding, there was a man in my seat with another in the aisle seat. The middle was open. I checked my seat number and then politely told the man he was in my seat and asked for him to move. I am a petite female, and both men were about 6 feet tall and over 200 pounds. When both opened their mouths, it definitely appeared like they both were used to using their size to get their way. The man in the aisle immediately told me that the man at the window didn't have to move, and I could sit in the middle. After all, he said, I shouldn't make a scene about it. That really pissed me off. I didn't raise my voice and was very polite. I said I wasn't making a scene, but was asking nicely for the seat I paid for. That's when he stood up and attempted to physically intimidate me. But here is the thing, I worked in frontline healthcare. I am used to men attempting to use their size and mouth to intimidate, and this behavior does not work with me. So, I decided to take another tactic. I turned my head to the man in my seat and told him that I would make him a deal. He gives me $50 cash, and I will give him my seat. I told him I paid an additional $45 for the seat, and with tax it should be around $50. He gives the money, and the seat would be his. This is when he turned to me in shock and said, "You want me to pay you $50 for your seat?" I answered. "So you are admitting that you knew this wasn't your seat? I am going to call the airline staff, and they can take you to your seat. After all, I booked this seat due to me having a disability, which is true, and you are trying to steal it." Everyone around us turned to look at him, and they did not have kind looks on their faces. He turned 14 shades of red and moved to the middle seat. He pulled his hoodie over his head and sulked the rest of the flight. His friend did the same. The moral of this story is simple. Do not use size and gender to bully others. It may just backfire on you and make your next flight a lot less comfortable. Story 2. A while back, I posted in another community about a lady who paid for my emergency vet visit. This happened on the same day, while I was waiting outside. I've been wanting to post this, but was still emotional about the incident, but I'm finally here. My cat needed to go to an emergency center, and only one within 4 towns was open and accepting emergencies. This was also during COVID, so people were required to sit in their cars with their pets and wait to be called. I don't have a car. I was dropped off and sat outside the building for 7 hours until they took my cat. I got to witness everything from a front row seat. Said Karen was in a pickup truck, tiny dog in tow, parked in a handicapped spot with no stickers or sign. I didn't think much of it. She was frantic and old. I figured she forgot her sign and/or was borrowing the truck in a hurry. Rather than calling, she booked it straight to the door and started pounding on it. My stomach sank. I had watched them put down 2 dogs by then and was already stressed and emotional. I was scared for her. The technician tells her to calm down and says that they were packed. It was an 8-hour wait, but they can check the dog's vitals every hour to make sure it wasn't critical. Lady agrees, taking him to the dog. I initially looked away, not wanting to see another bloodied or dying animal, but I heard him sigh and I had to look. He looked over at the dog, a tiny thing wagging its tail and jumping, told her it was fine for now, and explained their COVID protocol. She huffs, tries to argue with him, but he had to go, so he went back inside. Karen immediately turns to the few people outside her car and starts raising her voice about how nonsense this was, asking how long people were waiting. I don't think she saw me, but I knew then it was getting Karen-ish, so I sat, pet my cat through the carrier, and watched. A couple hours pass. She's fuming in her car, finally gets out, and starts banging on the door. Same thing as before, a technician comes out, checks the dog's vitals, and explains it's fine right now and can wait. At some point, I can't recall when exactly, they did actually take her dog. I didn't know because I didn't see, and she kept telling people they hadn't taken her dog. After 7 hours of sitting there, they finally took my cat. My boyfriend finally got off work, and came to wait with me because it was dark and getting really cold, and I left without my jacket because I was in a rush. We're sitting in the car. He's telling me it's going to be okay, and suddenly we hear screaming. Looking over, Karen had gotten out of her car and was screaming at the top of her lungs at the car next to her. A couple people from the emergency center came out too, and in a panic, I opened the door to hear what was happening. The only thing I could make sense of was the lady repeatedly screaming, "I hope your freaking dog dies. I hope your freaking dog dies," to the kid in the back seat of the car and calling her a witch. My boyfriend and the girl's dad both get out to tell her to back off and shut up. Vet technicians bring her dog out and tell her to leave. She's screaming and cussing at everyone and pushes one of the technicians. They finally tell her to leave or they're calling the cops, and she just starts calling them murderers. My boyfriend and the dad manage to push her away, and she gets in her car and pulls out, rolls her window down to scream a bit more and drives off. The kid in the car was just sobbing, my boyfriend and I asking if everything was okay, and offered to walk over to the ice cream shop down the street. Girl didn't want to. She wanted to be there if her dog came out, which was understandable. My boyfriend had asked the dad what happened, and I guess Karen was ranting about how long it was taking, and the girl had rolled her window down and told her that it was busy. They're packed, but they're doing the best they can, and Karen lost it. It was an emotional roller coaster that day, but that had to be the worst Karen I've ever witnessed. And I've worked in food customer service for 6 years. I don't think I'll ever understand why people act this way. Story 3. My great-uncle passed away at 97, and I heard this great story of malicious compliance at his memorial service today. He worked for over 50 years at the same confectionery factory, and for most of that time he was a boiler room attendant. This was just after World War II, and at the time most of the machines and processes were powered by steam, even the heating. The steam was generated by massive boilers, and it was his job to monitor the boilers to make sure nothing went wrong. These boilers could potentially explode, causing great damage. By law, the boiler had to be attended at all times, and there were shifts that watched them around the clock. Even when the factory was closed, they took so long to heat up that it was easier and cheaper to leave them running at night. After about 10 years of no incidents, the company hired a leading hand who would also act as the safety officer. He had been a sergeant in the army, and he took his job quite seriously, being quite the disciplinarian. He instituted a multitude of new procedures, some warranted, some just to establish control. The first time he wanted to conduct a fire drill, he went around telling the staff that when they heard the alarm they had to exit the building in an orderly fashion. He got to the boiler room, and it was my great-uncle on duty that day. He informed him he would not be able to evacuate with everyone else and had to stay with the boiler. The safety officer didn't give him time to explain why. He just bluntly informed him that he was to treat the fire drill as if it was a real fire, no exceptions. When the fire bell finally rang, my uncle did exactly what he was told to do. He turned off the gas to the boilers, vented all the built-up steam, purged the water, and joined everyone outside. At the evacuation point, they were doing a head count when the production manager spotted my uncle and immediately approached him and asked what he was doing away from the boiler. He said he was participating in the fire drill as instructed, but not to worry as he had shut the boiler down completely. The color immediately drained from the manager's face. He was asked how long it would take to bring the boilers back online. Apparently, it would take hours alone just to fill the boilers with water and heat them up. The big issue was that because they had done an emergency purge, they were required to inspect every pipe, joint, and connection for damage before to make sure it was safe to start to reheat. The other boiler men were called in, and they got paid double time to work through the night to get the boiler ready for the next day. Production staff all got sent home, but still got paid for the day, as it wasn't their fault the factory couldn't run. It cost them a day's production as well. The safety officer did keep his job, but for the next 40 years the boiler staff were all exempt from fire drills. Story 4. So I happened to remember this story whilst talking with some of my coworkers during lunch, and they all suggested I post this story, so I figured what the hell. Now I should probably preface this story with a few things. I'm a welder who works for an all but respectable outfit. Now the layout of the workshop consists of half a dozen cubicles where we each work, and straight ahead is what looks like a garage door where metal is brought in and finished projects are shipped out. I remember it was a beautiful summer day and we had some metal that needed to be cut, so we took an acetylene torch, our metal, and a metal sawhorse and got to work. Now for those who don't know, an acetylene torch burns at 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit 2200 Celsius. This comes into play in a bit. I was wearing a welding helmet and earplugs, and so I couldn't hear or see the she-devil known as Karen approaching. I felt someone tapping me on my shoulder, so I shut off the torch, flipped my helmet up, and took out my earplugs. I looked at the coworker who had gotten my attention, and he directed me towards the angry woman. She started to moan and tch that we were making too much noise, and that we needed to quiet down. A few welders had stopped what they were doing to see what the commotion, but those of us that had been outside just looked at each other. I tried to explain as politely as I could that as welders, the equipment we use and the tasks we undergo comes with some amount of noise. She screamed some unintelligible nonsense, I think it was in Latin. Then one of my coworkers pulled out a small packet of earplugs and said something like, "If the noise is that bad, I've got some spare earplugs you can have." And with that she once again shouted at us to be quiet and stormed off, while most of us just laughed it off, and we all got back to work. Maybe a few hours later I'm still cutting metal when I feel someone shove me hard. As I was shoved, my arm that's holding the still running torch gets moved to where the flame is now hitting me in the helmet. The plastic of the helmet melts and starts to stick to my skin. Keep in mind, this is happening as I'm falling. I hit the ground yelling and screaming as I have hot plastic searing into my skin. I was scrabbling at my partially melted helmet, trying to get it off. I finally managed to tear it off, and in the process I knocked my earplugs out. I was then able to hear my coworkers and Karen shouting at one another. They were all putting themselves between us, and one of my coworkers, who we'll call Juan, was seeing that I was okay. He helped me up and was leading me away when our boss, an absolute beast of a man, barges into the shop. I hear him shout and everyone quiets down. I don't know what all was said, but I later found out that the whole thing had been recorded and the cops had been called. To cut to the chase, the woman got arrested for assault. I was sent to the hospital with first-degree burns, and I got to spend some paid time off work to recover. Overall, all's well that ends well, I guess. Story 5. This story often comes up when people share retail horror tales, and even now, I can hardly believe the nerve of some folks when I think about it. Back in 2011, I worked 2 part-time retail jobs, one at a department store and another at what could loosely be described as an upscale clothing store. When I got an offer for my first full-time, 9-to-5 job, I had to decide which retail gig to leave. My schedule was split, with availability at the clothing store from Sunday to Wednesday and at the department store from Thursday to Saturday. Initially, I planned to quit the department store since I thought the clothing store's discount would come in handy for work attire. However, after working a few shifts under the new merchandising manager at the clothing store, I quickly changed my mind. She was fresh out of school and trying hard to assert her authority, often in unnecessary ways. Meanwhile, the folks at the department store were much nicer to work with overall. To avoid conflicts, I planned my new job's start date so it wouldn't interfere with my existing retail shifts. I stopped by the clothing store to give my notice. The general manager wasn't in, so I ended up speaking to the merchandising manager, who was the manager on duty that day. I don't remember exactly how the start date for my new job came up, but the manager on duty took issue with the fact that I wasn't scheduled for the last 3 or 4 days of the second week of my notice. Those were days I'd marked as unavailable in the system due to my other part-time job. She claimed that starting my new job during those days meant I wasn't giving a full 2 weeks' notice, arguing that I wouldn't be available to cover shifts if needed. Our conversation went something like this. "Me, hi, I'm here to give my 2 weeks' notice. I'll work my scheduled shifts during that time. It's been great, and I'm sad to leave. Manager on duty, will you be available on all other days if someone needs a shift covered? Me, on the days I'm usually available here, yes. On days I work my other job, it depends on whether I have a shift that conflicts. Next Thursday and Friday, I'd only be available after 5 p.m. Looking back, I was too honest and should have just said yes and declined any conflicts later. You live and learn. Manager on duty, since you can't fully commit to being available next Thursday through Saturday, you're not giving a full 2 weeks notice. That means you're quitting effective immediately. Me, even if I weren't leaving this job, I wouldn't be able to commit to those days fully because they're my department store days, just like the rest of the week belongs to this store. Manager on duty, we need to know you're available if someone needs a shift covered. Me, as I said, I'm happy to help if there's no conflict, just as I've always done. But if I'm already scheduled at my other job, I have to decline. Manager on duty, that's not good enough. Either give us full availability for the next 2 weeks or consider yourself done here. Me, okay, cool? Bye. Walks out. Here's the thing. It's nice to help coworkers by covering their shifts, and I was more than willing to do so when I could. But it was not a requirement. We were only obligated to work the shifts we were scheduled for. I wasn't about to let a part-time retail job dictate my availability and jeopardize my new full-time position with benefits. As I walked to my car, I was calm, even a little amused. Sure, keeping those shifts would have been nice, but I wasn't going to delay starting my new job just because a part-time gig made unreasonable demands. Then, I heard the manager on duty running down the sidewalk, calling after me. Manager on duty, you need to come back and start calling other employees to cover your shifts. Me, stunned, you literally just told me I don't work here anymore. Manager on duty, but you still have to cover your shifts. Sit in the office and call down the list of employees now. Me laughs in disbelief, absolutely not. I'm no longer an employee. I was happy to work those shifts, but you made your decision. This is now your problem. When I got into my car, the general manager called me. She politely explained that if I didn't give 2 weeks' notice, I would lose my good standing with their parent company and be ineligible to work for any of their brands in the future. I respected the general manager and explained what had happened. I told her I was fine with those consequences and wouldn't change my stance. We wished each other well, and that was the end of it. A year later, I quit the department store as well and never went back to retail. Story 6. I worked for company for 14 years. I loved working there for 12 of those years. There were 2 main parts to the job. The first part was the sales side of things. This was away from the office, in the customer's location. This involved quite a bit of driving, and on a couple of occasions flying abroad, to work face-to-face with the customers to deliver a high-quality product. We weren't the cheapest, but we were the superior product, and I was the best employee when it came to delivering the product. I constantly got rave reviews from customers for my personal style when it came to delivering the product and executing the customer's vision. I got a huge amount of repeat business, and I got a lot of new business through word of mouth with customers recommending the company based on their experiences with me. The second part was the office side. This was my weaker side. I hated cold calling potential customers with numbers I found in the phone book. When it came to answering the phone and speaking to potential customers who initiated contact with us, I was fine. But I wasn't great at making the calls. This was my only real not great part of my job. So, in the office, I wasn't asked to make any calls. Instead, I prepared the product, designed a new product, and trained new staff members. Ended up being one of the biggest parts of my job. I was also the problem solver, helping out whenever and wherever, filling in for sick employees whenever I could. I liked the owner and I liked the manager. I liked all the staff who were around me. All in all, it was a great job that I was really good at and took pride in. The company had been doing so well that the owner had slowly expanded over the 12 years since I started working for company. I had joined about 3 months after he started, so I'd been a part of this expansion. I worked out of my nearest office, but often traveled to other areas to train their staff. I was loaned out, as it were, to other companies to help train their staff. At one point, I was a guest lecturer at a university teaching medical students how to deliver complicated explanations to people who don't have the base knowledge that you yourself do. After 12 years, I was on a decent salary. Not massive, but I was happy. Then the owner decided to sell off part of the company. He was selling the area where my local office was. He told me he would love for me to remain as his employee, but I would need to work from a different office. This would either require me to move or to quadruple, at a minimum, my daily commute. The other option was to remain working from my current office, but with a new boss. I chose the second option. Before the new owner bought the company, she worked alongside the staff for a couple of weeks to see how we operated. This was before any of us knew she was about to buy the company. As far as we knew, she was just another employee, and she was shadowing us to learn. She came with me on assignments in the field and saw my abilities. When the sale was announced, and we were informed that she was the new owner, everyone was very surprised. She made some sweeping staffing changes. The manager left to start her own business. Since the new owner was also going to be the manager, a lot of staff were let go. The secretary, myself, and a couple of newer hires were kept on. The new hires were on the lowest wages, not salaries. Anyone who had got to a decent level was let go. Since almost everyone was on a 0-hours contract, she was able to do this. Whilst technically it was a new company, for the customers it was the same old business. The company still had the same trading name. The only real difference was that there was a new owner and the registered business name was now different. As far as the customers were concerned, nothing had changed. My job for the first few months after the sale was to train up the remaining staff to replace the more experienced staff members who had been let go. I recommended a couple of new hires who I had experience working with in the past. I was open and honest with the owner and let her know that one of them was a close friend and one of them was my girlfriend. Both were more than qualified for the work, and both were happy to join. My friend had recently come back to the country after a year of traveling, whilst my girlfriend could only work during school holidays, worked in a school. The owner gave them both interviews, then hired them, since we needed the staff. Over the next 2 years, business started to fall. The reason was simple. The new owner decided to try and maximize profits by increasing prices whilst decreasing the quality of the product. For new customers, this wasn't noticeable. They just thought we were expensive and the product wasn't the best. But for old customers who had been with us for 10+ years, they immediately noticed. They were being charged more and were receiving less worse quality. So the owner doubled down and increased prices again. 95% of our old customers left us. New customers almost never became repeat customers. Complaints skyrocketed. Whilst all this was going on, our staff turnover rate was ridiculous. People left after a few months when they realized that the minimum wage they were being paid wasn't worth it. Under the old owner, the average hourly wage for new employees was around 2.5x the minimum wage. This made people care about their jobs and want to keep them. My girlfriend quit. My friend remained, but was looking for something new. Then I got a phone call. The owner needed me to come to the office. This was unexpected. I had just finished working on location with a customer. My next customer was in 2.5 hours. It was a half-hour drive away. The office was about an hour and 10 minutes away from both locations. If I drove back to the office, I would have about 5 minutes in the office before leaving. My mileage was paid above my regular salary, so I was saving the company money by doing this. Also, parking was a nightmare around the second location, so I intended to get there as early as possible to find parking, then read a book. The manager didn't care. She needed me to return to the office, so I did. I arrived back to be handed a letter by the owner. It was informing me of a disciplinary meeting to take place in a couple of days' time. I could bring a witness along if I so desired. This knocked me for 6. I was the best employee. I read through her list of complaints about my performance and started working on my defense. At the meeting, I declined to have a witness. Instead, I decided to record the audio of the entire meeting on my phone without informing her. Where I live, this is legal, and I didn't need consent. The boss witness was her friend who she had met at yoga and hired for an office role, firing the secretary who had been there long before the takeover. Every point she raised I could counter. They ranged from the week. You were unavailable to work for a week in August. I booked a week's holiday so I could attend my cousin's wedding on the other side of the country and turn it into a holiday. To the pathetic. You were late for work on the 12th of May. Is that the day my car broke down and I called the office to let you know? I don't know. I do. Here's the receipt from the garage dated May 12th. To the downright lies. This one I can't write as a quote. Basically, she accused me of gross misconduct for breaking health and safety laws in the way I was delivering a product for a customer. I hadn't broken health and safety laws. I knew exactly what I was doing since, as I've mentioned already, I had been doing this for 14 years at this point. She had witnessed me do this on multiple occasions and had never mentioned it before. Because it wasn't an issue. She even had me train staff in this specific delivery method. Because it wasn't an issue. She finished her list by telling me that she doesn't want to lose me, but she can't justify keeping such a poor employee at my current salary. I had two choices. I could either sign a 0-hours contract and work for minimum wage, or she could fire me with 2 weeks' notice. I countered that she would have to give me 12 weeks' notice, since my contract guaranteed me 1 week's notice for every year of employment, up to a maximum of 12. She argued that I had only been her employee for 2 years, since before then I worked for the previous owner. I informed her that with how the business takeover had run, it counts as continuous employment. I quoted the exact law and code that backed me up. She asked for a 30-minute break in the meeting to let me think about her offer. She went to call her lawyer. When she came back, she informed me that since she was firing me for gross misconduct, she didn't have to give me any notice at all. If I wanted to remain and move to the 0-hours contract, I could do that today. But if I didn't, then she would have to fire me. But because she was nice, she would give me the 2 weeks' notice. I asked for a couple of hours to go home and think about this. She allowed this. I knew the reason she wanted me to remain for at least 2 weeks was because one of our few remaining bigger customers was set to have a product delivery from me at that time. They would only work with me. The owner had tried sending other staff in my place on several occasions, and each time there had been problems. It wasn't the staff's fault. It was just a very difficult delivery for a very specific customer, which needed to be perfect. As a result, this customer would only deal with me. I called the office and spoke to the owner. I declined the offer of a 0-hours contract and said I would be leaving. She then said she was giving me my 2 weeks' notice. I declined her offer of 2 weeks' notice. I informed her that if I was being fired for gross misconduct, then surely I cannot be relied upon to safely deliver the product. Therefore, it would be best for everyone involved if I didn't return to work. She panicked and said that she needed me for those 2 weeks. I feigned ignorance and let her know that I was just thinking about what's best for the company. After all, you can't have unsafe staff delivering your product to your customers. However, if she wanted to rethink the gross misconduct accusation, then I would work my 12 weeks' notice. They were her options, 0 weeks or 12. She chose 12. For those 12 weeks, I worked the same way I had for 14 years. I didn't coast. I didn't slack. I didn't badmouth the company on my way out. I continued to train new staff. I continued to deliver the product in my own, personal, exceptional way. I also got in touch with a lawyer who was a specialist in employment law. For those 12 weeks, the owner barely spoke to me. She resented the fact that I knew my legal rights and didn't just believe her lies. She hated the fact that I could defend myself. She was petty. She accidentally dropped my mug in the kitchen, breaking it. Most petty of all, she paid for every member of staff in the office to have a spa day, except me. I was asked to work my day off to answer the phones whilst everyone else was being pampered. Nobody knew I hadn't been invited until they arrived at the spa and I wasn't there. Here's the thing. I'm a big, fat, bearded guy. I have no interest in a spa day. If she had offered it to me, I would have thanked her and declined the kind offer. But by pointedly excluding me, she was making herself look terrible. For the last 2 weeks I was training up my friend to basically take over from me. At the end of the 12 weeks, my final day came around. The owner had nothing planned. Not so much as a card after 14 years, 2 for her. The office assistant manager, who had become a friend, had got me some presents, but had to give them to me once the boss was gone, for fear of reprisals. The day after my final day, 2 things happened. The first was my friend, who I had been training to replace me, quit. He was on a 0-hours contract, so required no notice. He was unhappy with her treatment of me, and was unhappy that she expected him to do my previously salaried job for minimum wage. He hadn't informed me of his plans to leave, and I only learned of it when he knocked on my door in the middle of the day, when he should have been at work to let me know. The second was the owner received a letter informing her that I was bringing legal proceedings against her for constructive dismissal. I had arranged this with my lawyer to be delivered the day after my final day. According to the office assistant, she went pale and started crying before leaving the office to call her lawyer. She refuted my claims for constructive dismissal, said it was gross misconduct, tried to come up with some more reasons for firing me. But the truth was that the company was making less money because of her business practices, and I was the highest and only salary. I had evidence that I was a great employee. I had evidence that she asked me to move to a 0-hours contract. She initially tried to deny this, since the gross misconduct fabrication makes no sense if she wanted me to stay. But once my lawyer provided hers with a transcript of the entire meeting along with a copy of the recording, she knew she was screwed. Still, she let the case drag on for over a year. I think she hoped that the legal fees would lead to me dropping the case. Little did she know my lawyer was working on a no-win, no-fee basis, whilst hers wasn't. She ended up settling out of court. The aftermath. The office assistant, who had become a friend, quit a couple of months after I left. She hated how I was treated and didn't feel safe working for such an untrustworthy boss. Several former customers contacted me personally to inquire why I was no longer with the company. Apparently, the owner was telling them that I just quit. I informed them that I had been fired for cost-cutting reasons. They moved their business elsewhere. Several offered me jobs. One went so far as to offer me a part-time job and to pay for me to attend college to earn a degree required for them to hire me full-time. This was a lovely offer, but they were one of the customers who were a bit too far away to commute, and I wasn't ready to move. In the end, I found a new job in a different industry where a lot of my skills transferred over. Currently earning more than I was, working less hours and for better owners. The business is floundering. COVID left the new owner desperate for cash. She canceled orders but refused to refund customers' money, citing an unfair clause in the contracts. The business Facebook and Google reviews have tanked. Most of the staff left. The business is barely afloat and will probably be done soon.